Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do. But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys. Remember that guy. 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 They're just gonna remember some guys now.
Cal has no idea, and Alex Rodriguez said, you know what? I want Ripken to play short, and we'll see if Ripken is accepting. You knew he wouldn't want to remember that guy, the show where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players past and present. Hey there, folks. I'm one of your hosts, James, and I too would like to shoo out of the way to let an esteemed colleague take their rightful place.
Well, I appreciate that, James. Diaz back with you once again. But here's what people don't remember about that All-Star game. There was a third person who had to switch into a different position, and he's going to switch into a position he's actually very used to. Please introduce yourself.
That's right. It's me, the guy who gave Alex Rodriguez all those steroids and got him hooked to it. That Balco guy, whatever his name is, I don't remember it.
Conti?
Some stupid name,
something like that.
Tony Conti sounds very correct.
Yeah, I'm that guy now.
Well, thank you for being here,
Victor
Tony Conti. I gotta know Victor Conti.
I'm his cousin.
We couldn't get Victor Conti, but we could get Tony Conti.
I googled Balco guy for that.
We are here to talk about guys other than the Balco guys. But before we get to those guys, Tony Conti, is there anything making memories for you right now?
Oh God, I have so many. Are you guys okay with me taking like 10 minutes on this?
Blast through it, baby.
Okay. On Sunday night, Sunday the 17th, a Jets fan on Twitter said, ordering Mike Williams a Taylor ham / pork roll, egg and cheese to arrive at 1 Jets Drive tomorrow morning. It'll be there at 10 a.m. And then after it found out that Mike Williams' visit was pushed back a day, he said, tomorrow morning it is. This morning, he said, Mike Williams' breakfast sandwich is on the way. Let me know when it arrives at New York Jets. The Jets responded with a picture of the sandwich in its bag saying, got it, at about 8:21 this morning. They just tweeted 26 minutes ago, we're going to need a fresh sandwich because Mike Williams is signing with the New York Jets. And we have all decided that this Taylor ham pork roll sandwich is the reason why Mike Williams is signing with the Jets, who have now signed Mike Williams and Tyron Smith since last week when I had to rant about our quarterback maybe becoming a vice presidential candidate.
Well, and also we know he won't be the vice presidential candidate.
So now the Jets look good. The Jets actually have good players on their offensive line and a solid wide receiver group, which means they have a lot of flexibility at pick number 10. I know people are saying Brock Bowers. Drafting a tight end in the first round is stupid, just in general. Like, no matter how great they are, it's never a good idea just in terms of like financial value and positional value.
Well, and let's look at who are the best tight ends in the league right now. George Kittle, Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce. I don't think any of them even had top 3 draft round capital invested in them.
I do believe Mark Andrews is
third round pick, right? I think so. And
to that point, definitely not a first and certainly not top 10 to that point.
And Sam Laporta, who was really good last year, I think was second round. Most good tight ends are not taken in the first round. So as great as Bowers is, unless they say, fuck it, we're not going to use you as a tight end, you're just going to be a receiver, he'd be great. And I think the Jets would use him well with Aaron Rodgers, but I just don't think it's good value to do so. But say they trade down like 5 or 6 spots and then draft him at 15 or 16. At that point, maybe it might be worth it if they pick up a couple extra picks. But either way, a lot more flexibility now where they don't have to. It's not definitely we need to get an offensive lineman so other teams can jump ahead of us like the Steelers did last year, or we definitely need a wide receiver. The Jets are kind of chilling where maybe if teams want to pass the Vikings, who everyone knows want to draft a quarterback, the Jets can trade down. So that's good. I'm excited about the Jets. Other things I'm excited about, the Exeter Demons winning the British Universities of College Sport D1 American football title this afternoon. a thing that I did not know existed until I saw it on Twitter this afternoon and then watched the entire second half. So
I didn't realize you watched that much of it. We all happily knew the outcome.
Time.
How, in one word, how would you describe the level of play?
Running. I don't know.
Is it a triple option kind of thing?
I'm not sure I saw successful passes.
Did it look like a Service Academy game?
It was a lot of running. The MVP of the game was Exeter's running back, who is this big, stocky white guy named Carl West, who has a mullet. And I was like, yes, that is exactly what I predicted the best player on Exeter University's football team would look like. And I hope it made Leon happy too, who also did not know that this was a thing until today, and he's from there.
Up the demons.
The other things I wanted to talk about, I'll go real quick through a couple of these. There's 2 coach firing tweets that made me very, very happy. First is Gerard Haas, who was the Stanford basketball coach. I'm going to read this tweet verbatim. Stanford's Ann and Tony Joseph, director of men's basketball, Gerard Haas, has been relieved of his duties effective immediately, as announced by Jacques and Kenninger, director of athletics, Bernard Muir. Stanford has sold the naming rights to being their coach and being their AD, so they have to read out the names of the benefactors before the name of the person in the firing tweet.
A more common thing than you realize.
Yeah, you've got the Delaware one, right?
Delaware might have, but I know most of the coaches at Penn had the full name. So it is a thing, but it is a funny thing too, because it leads to a very Buffalo sentence where it's just, there's 8 proper names in a row that you just gave me.
The other one comes from Belgium.
The land of chocolate.
So I'm sure you both remember the "We hebben een serious probleem" tweet from that Dutch politician. Something nearly as great happened earlier when Ronnie Dyla, who used to be the coach of New York City FC, was fired from Club Brugge. This is the tweet in the native language. Ronnie Dyla is niet langer hoofdcoach van Club Brugge. Hoofdcoach is how they say head coach.
Okay, yeah.
That's soccer coach. So niet langer hoofdcoach van Club Brugge is no longer head coach of Club Brugge. Just if someone wanted to mock Belgium by saying what they thought this firing tweet would sound like in Belgian, they would have been right.
That's which language is it? The guy who, there was the expose that it was just one random guy typing gibberish that wrote 70% of Scott's Wikipedia.
Yeah.
That's so good.
He's just completely made up all of this information about an otherwise dying language. It's very bleak and also hysterical.
I'm going to just go real quick. So have you heard of rug ball? Because apparently this goes viral on social media every year or two, but I saw it yesterday. It's Russian suplex wrestle basketball, where you play basketball,
I have seen this video.
but you literally can just take your shirt off to show that you're about to wrestle someone and just pick up the dribbler and fucking suplex them to take the ball away. And you see half the team is playing basketball, the other half is literally just wrestling each other. Last 2 things. Do you know what the WBIT is?
Nope.
I know the WNIT. Is this the WCBI kind of thing that we're going for?
Close. The NCAA wanted to replace the women's NIT because they don't run it. So they want to create their own NIT to go along with the NCAA tournament. They just wanted to have both. So this year they invented the WBIT to kind of just kept the NIT out from the start. And Miami, Florida was the first team left out of the NCAA tournament. So the NCAA themselves announced them as the number 1 overall seed for the WBIT. They then published a press release and bracket explaining that the number 1 seed. And then Stony Brook put out a press release announcing that they were going to be playing at Miami. Miami declines to go to the WBIT.
Yeah, I would imagine.
So the NCAA just very quickly, instead of changing anything else about the bracket, add James Madison and make them the number 1 overall seed to the WBIT instead of changing the rest of the bracket. A team that they didn't think was good enough to be invited to this new secondary tournament, they just made the number 1 overall seed because Miami turned them down after it was announced that they were the number 1 overall.
What a come up for Dukes.
It is a great come up for the Dukes. They become the number 1 seed in a tournament that no one had ever heard of and did not exist before yesterday. The last thing I had to bring up, did you hear about the LA golf black market?
This one, actually, yes, I did.
I have not.
So one of the interesting things about Los Angeles is that because of its size, actually has a lot of public golf courses that are supposed to be cheap and available for everyone to use. Problem is, they can't meet the demand of the amount of people who want to play there. So there has become a Korean black market for tee times because all these tee times sell out immediately at 6 a.m. when they're announced. And golfers have found out that they have to download a Korean messaging app, message one specific number, Venmo that person money, and they'll get a tee time for these courses. This big expose on how crazy this is, its current reporting is that these Korean senior citizens who get 1 day earlier access to tee times on a thing that apparently is not supposed to be allowed, but is like an open secret that seniors get a 10-day window instead of a 9-day window. These Korean senior citizens have been booking up all of these tee times and then essentially trading it on the black market to other Koreans and then charging all the non-Koreans to book these tee times.
I refuse to believe that you're not just describing to me the latest episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm.
It does sound like a Larry David thing. I love the idea of Korean black market for tee times at Los Angeles' public courses. And I can't wait to see more information about this as it comes out. Because just imagine being like, oh, I want to go golfing. And now I have to download a Korean messaging app called Kakao to get a tee time that costs more than the actual tee time itself costs.
Capitalism breeds innovation.
Well, capitalism breeds innovation, but I have been talking for the 10 plus minutes I told you I was going to. Someone else, please tell me what is making memories for you.
Well, it's nearly baseball season. All I can think about is baseball. None of the baseball counts yet, though. So instead, you just, you go to your podcasts, you listen to your season previews. I was listening to the Baseball Barbiecast one recently, and they mentioned how weird it is that, like, it used to be that the AL West had 4 teams and the NL Central had 6 teams. And yeah, that was weird. It was really weird that we were all just, like, fine with that. Yeah, Houston Astros came over. They've won 6 AL West division titles in the 11 years that they've been in the AL West, which is insane. But it made me wonder, who was the last team in baseball to finish in 6th place? And so I did some research, and I'm going to present that as my making memories this week. Let's just start with that question being answered. The last team to finish 6th place, the 2012 Houston Astros, 55-107 that year. So they hold that bottom feeder belt. But that's just the National League, and that begat more questions. So I went back a little bit further. Want to know what the last team to finish 6th in the American League was. And it was a tie in 1993 because, of course, this is before the wild card era when there's 2 divisions in each of the leagues. And the 2 6th-place teams that year are Cleveland and Minnesota. But that doesn't matter too much because there were 7 teams in each division. So let's go a little further down. 7th-place teams that year. Oakland, and in the American League, the Milwaukee Brewers, one of the last 7th-place American League teams of all time. Notably, of course, now in that first 6-person and now 5-person NL Central. The Mets and the Padres were the 7th in the other 2. Oakland, Brewers, Padres, and Mets feels pretty appropriate for the last 7th-place teams. But we can't leave it right there because there is still just a little bit further that we can go down. In 1968, the year before division started, you still just have the 2 leagues. And so there were teams that year that finished 8th, 9th, and 10th, becoming the last teams to ever do so. The 8th place teams in the American League, it's actually a tie between the California Angels and the Chicago White Sox. National League, it is the Phillies. Phillies are the last National League 8th place team of all time. 9th for the American League, and it gets a little complicated. As I said, there's a tie there for 8th. So you could argue it's one of those two. It lists Chicago underneath them just because of alphabetical order. I would personally, for my purposes, argue it's the 1967 New York Yankees that finished in 9th place, since the team didn't really finish in 9th the following year. So Yankees get to hold on to that belt. And the Mets get to hold on to it in the National League. So appropriate once again that we have these two teams intertwined. But let's get to the reigning 10th place teams, the last of the last in the American League. It is the Washington Senators. This is the Washington Senators franchise that, up until last season, had never won a championship at all. Very appropriate, again, that it holds this 10th place. But of course, it is also the Washington Senators franchise that is now, after last season, the reigning champions, because it is the Texas Rangers. Texas Rangers are one of the 2 10th place team title holders. The other, you don't have to go far, because in the National League, it is none other than the Houston Astros. Both the last 6th place and 10th place teams in the National League, despite no longer being in the National League. I just really, really enjoyed that rabbit hole going down, and I hope that you did too. It's baseball season, baby. It's so close. So close.
I love that. I love baseball fans' ability to go down these rabbit holes almost as much as it made me so happy to see the Korea series and that all the memes of all the Dodgers players looking at Jung Jung-soo, the actress throwing out the first pitch. None of them cared about decorum. They were all just staring at this extremely attractive actress wearing skin-tight leggings to advertise her own brand of leggings, I believe. And they made no reservations about, yes, we're not looking at the pitch. We are staring directly here. And it made for some really great reactions from Korean Twitter, which is one of the funniest Twitters there is.
Well, speaking of soul, what deep in your soul, Diaz, is making memories for you right now?
Well, it's the most wonderful time of the year, James. It is March, and I am mad with joy in a happy sense, because there has been so much basketball in the past couple weeks, and there's going to be so much more basketball to come. It's truly the best time of the year. I just want to quickly hit on a few teams that aren't getting talked about enough. First off, our Temple Owls. And for a while, they haven't been our Temple Owls. They have been those fucking Temple Owls that don't represent us. But as of this incredible tournament run, they are once again our Temple Owls. I watched Temple basketball games with actual hope in my heart for the first time in probably a decade.
We had that one year, like, what was it, 2018, 2019, that was good, but I mean,
that year didn't count.
We hadn't won a tournament game in the conference tournament in 6 years. And then we won 4 in 4 days. Like,
we had never won
ridiculous.
A tournament game in the American. Yeah,
I think we'd won like American. 2, but I think it was only ever won like first round games. We hadn't won one in like 6 years.
Okay. Either way, a long history of absolutely sucking in the American tournament, knocking off Florida Atlantic, and even in the game to UAB, which it needs to be said, it's so funny that the championship game ends up being against UAB after it was the line movement in the game at UAB that set off these allegations and investigations into potential match fixing. Also, I mean, like, we do need to say the fact that they started winning once these accusations came out, maybe it does lend itself a little bit. It does presuppose the point, but I think there's a lot more reasonable explanations for that, such as Temple sucked all year and like in that 2.5 line shouldn't have been there. But that's the beauty of March, is any team can get hot at any time, and Temple got red hot at just the right time. Ended up falling a game short, but it wasn't for lack of effort. Specifically, Hysier Miller, what a guy. Absolutely incredible. He drops 32 in that championship game in his 5th game in 5 days after carrying the team through the previous 4 rounds. From Philly, Newman Goretti kid. There are the worries in the modern environment in college basketball. Could this have elevated his profile to the point where he transfers to a bigger school? Maybe it could happen. However, I'm optimistic and I'm hopeful that Heisier Miller will do the right thing, will stay home, because he has a chance to put Temple basketball back on the map in a real big way next year. There's genuine excitement around the team again. And, that's just a beautiful thing to feel.
Knock on wood. He hasn't transferred yet. I know 300 plus people have already entered the portal because for some reason the NCAA has opened the portal on the day after the regular season is over, which is insane because now we have players transferring to and from teams that seasons are not done yet. But so far, no one has transferred. Heisier did verbally commit to SMU in the last offseason before Fisher talked him into staying. So I'm hoping that means he's going to stay. I did confirm Temple has won an American Conference game before. That 2015-16 season when they won the regular season title, that was the year they lost on that putback to Iowa in the first round of the NCAA tournament that shouldn't have counted.
Oh, the push in the back. OB got pushed in the back so fucking hard.
Yep, but we don't have to relive that because it fucking sucked.
Right. But no, I mean, to your point, though, Adam Fisher, all year, I was kind of a little skeptical. I wasn't really sure what to think. And look, if it isn't true that winning cures everything, but the way that he represented Temple that whole week and in his press conferences and in all of the things that he had to say and just the way that he led the team, he is the right man for the job. And again, I mean, that's the other thing you worry about, where if he's too successful here, maybe he isn't here that long. But look, local guy, Bucks County guy, he's the right man for the job. So we have reason for optimism there. Also, just want to touch on the MAC tournament real quick because that shit was dope on both sides of the bracket.
But it's the MAC.
Yeah, exactly. The MAC. Exactly. AA, MAAC tournament. They'll talk about both champions. First of all, on the men's side, the Peacocks are back again. St. Peter's is back, and they're doing it in a very different way than they did the first time around. Almost none of those guys from the first run are still around. They're doing it largely all season behind Corey Washington. He's a exciting wing, kind of attack the basket, get a bucket type guy, but who carried them through the tournament. And it was a center who entered the tournament having made 6 threes all season. He made 3 in their semifinal upset of number 1 seed Quinnipiac. He averaged a block a game coming into the tournament. He averaged 4 blocks a game for the tournament. Averaged, I think, 5 points a game and was more like 12, 13 for the tournament. Mohamed Sow, one of the most incredible performances I've ever seen, because you also need to remember that he played 3 games in a row in 3 days, and he did it while fasting for Ramadan. It harkens back to Hakeem Olajuwon. It's insane to me to think that a person is actively dehydrated and has not eaten in a long time and is still able to go out there and perform in the way they did. Because I can tell you, I tried to go for a run on, I think, my second day of working that tournament, and I wasn't even playing basketball. I was just working, and I threw up on the boardwalk after my run, and I didn't even go that far. And that was only on the second day in a row. So for him to perform like he did on the third day in a row under those kind of circumstances, absolutely incredible. And then on the women's side, I got to talk about the most disrespected team by the NCAA selection committee of all time. Fairfield women, led by Carly Thibault-Dudanis. First of all, I just got to talk about this incredible basketball family. Her husband, Blake, is an assistant coach on her staff. Her father, Mike Thibault, is the winningest head coach in WNBA history. Won the title with the Mystics back with that Elena Delle Donne run. And he's currently the general manager of the Mystics. The current coach of the Mystics, that's going to be Eric Thibault. That's his son, and that's Carly's brother. So an incredible basketball family that the Thibaults have. And this Fairfield team had an incredible season. They ran the table within the MAC, at least. They only lost 1 game all year by 3 points at Vanderbilt, who made the tournament as a 12 seed. They went down 12 in the conference championship game, but if you know anything about March, it's going to get ugly sometimes. Doesn't matter. You don't get style points. You just got to win. And they come back from 12 down against Niagara to win it. I love Niagara because they play the way that if I were to coach a team, I would play. They do the like hockey ship type thing where they're pressing the whole game in high intensity defense. No player plays more than like 22 minutes a game.
They also have
Fairfield
the best
handled them.
name.
Oh, the
Love
Purple Eagles.
Love Purple Eagles.
Well, and you know who the men's head coach is there?
I don't.
I'll give you a hint. He's Duke legend and Syracuse legend. Duke basketball, Syracuse football.
Why am
Greg
I blanking
Paulus.
on this? Oh, really?
Greg Paulus is the men's coach.
Interesting.
So a very fun basketball program on both sides there for Niagara. But Fairfield, as I said, dominant. One loss all year. It's on to an SEC team by 3 points. And how do they get rewarded for this? They find themselves on the 13 line. And not only that, they are going to Indiana to play Indiana in what is essentially a road game in their first round of the tournament. Highly disrespected. But if you're listening, and if you are listening, it's too late because the tournament's already started. But if you were to somehow violate the way the time works, quantum time mechanics, come back to when I'm saying this now and pencil in Fairfield as your 13-4 upset. Because you're not going to go down without a fight. Shout out the Red Foxes, and that's Marist. Fairfield is what's Fairfield?
Are they Stags or something?
They are the Stags. Yes, the Fairfield Stags.
Yeah, I was
Thank
right.
you. And they're like the exact same shade of red too. Like, so all that maxed up is kind of mush in my brain right now. But what's important is who finished on top in those tournaments. St. Peter's men, watch out for them. Going to be very dangerous against Tennessee. And Fairfield women, why not go into Indiana, shock the world, keep making some memories for yourself.
I think the MAC is like technically my home conference because 4 of the teams are within an hour from me, and the only closer team is Army.
It's a fun conference.
Well, hey now, they need to get their game on and get paid, but actually we can't talk about them or Cal or A-Rod this week, going back to that intro, because Diaz, I hear you got something else in mind.
Absolutely, because I think there was some justified qualms about the specific qualifications of the previous week, because a one-time All-Star, there can be something vague there. But on the other side of that binary is a no-time All-Star. So that's what we want to talk about this week, about some guys that never made it to an All-Star game, where nobody ever had even the slightest thought that they could be an All-Star. Nonetheless, they find ways to contribute, and they're still worth remembering. And if you couldn't tell by my making memories, I love March. I love college basketball. It is, to me, March Madness is the single greatest tournament in all of sports anywhere in the world. And I know Leon might have some issues with that. I know some other more soccer-inclined people might say, hey, the FA Cup, that's well and fine. But I think one thing that they both capture is just kind of that magic of elimination tournament, right? Anybody at any time can win or can lose one game. You can look at that from the perspective of the underdog. You can also look at it from the perspective of the favorite. There's going to be those times where it's more tight than you thought it was going to be. Maybe some things have happened that have gone against you, and you need somebody else to step up in a big moment and deliver for your team to go through. The guy I want to talk about had a similar kind of story within their own March Madness run. I want to take you back to 1995. And at this time, if you know anything about women's hoops, Pat Summitt and the Tennessee Lady Vols are the premier program in the land, far and away. In January, they took a trip to the Northeast to reveal a potential changing of the guard. They went up to UConn to face a team that hadn't won a national championship yet. But Gino Auriemma was building up his program, and to this point in the year, they were undefeated. This was number 1 versus number 2. And if you look back in hindsight, this was a UConn team that was absolutely stacked with legends of the game. You got Rebecca Lobo, you have Kara Walters, you have Jennifer Rosati, You have Nikesha Sales, who would eventually become the all-time leading scorer for UConn. If you remember, she had the moment where I believe she blew out her Achilles in like the second to last game of the season. And the next game was against Villanova. And they arranged with Villanova that she stood under the basket. They won the tip. They passed it down to her. She got 2 points. They let Nova get 2 points on the other side. They fouled. They got her out. She got the record because she got injured exactly 1 point shy of that all-time record. A little story within the story that was worth telling. But they had all these big names, and Gino Auriemma convinced them to come to Stores. UConn would win that game, and these teams would meet again in March. And with the game on the line, he didn't go to any of those studs that I mentioned. He wanted to go to the quiet kid on the bench they kept to herself, but she'd already stepped up earlier in that first half when some foul trouble forced her into more playing time than she may have otherwise gotten. I want to talk about the sixth woman on those UConn teams, Carla Berube.
Carla Berube?
Yeah, Carla Berube was born September 2nd, 1975 in Oxford, Massachusetts. Grew up not far from where Dr. Naismith invented the sport, so she took to it naturally. And while playing at Oxford High School, she lifted her program to heights previously unseen. Her junior and senior year, they win the first 2 state titles in school history. And based on that, her play is kind of a combo guard, 1-2. She draws the attention of Gino Auriemma and what he's trying to build at UConn, and he decides to give her a scholarship. She commits to UConn. When she joins UConn, this isn't the UConn that eventually became the most dominant single team in the history of college sports. This is a UConn that is on the rise, but hasn't gotten to the top of the mountain yet. When Gino took over UConn, they had never made an NCAA tournament. He went his first 3 years building them up, but as Carla joins the program, they've now made the NCAA tournament 5 years in a row. They advanced to the Final Four in one of those years, but otherwise haven't made it out of the first weekend yet. So a team on the rise, but a team that certainly hasn't gotten there yet. She steps in her freshman year, and as the first player off the bench, she averaged 1 point a game to go with 5 boards, 3 assists. Very solid contributor. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, she does it while being the absolute quietest kid on the court. Gino Auriemma still to this day says Carla was the quietest player that we ever had. And she now jokes like, look, I was talking to everybody. I just wasn't talking to Gino. I was to my teammates. But she comes in, plays this good role in her first year. They get a 1 seed going into the tournament. They make it to the Elite 8. But the kind of knock against UConn at this point is they're running up this record, but they're doing it in a weaker conference for women's basketball at this point. The more power teams are in the SEC, ACC, Big Ten. The Big East is not considered a good conference for women's basketball at this point. And those concerns get proven correct when they get bounced by UNC in the Elite 8, 81-69. And UNC would go
Not
on.
too nice because it was too low, but still kind of nice.
Right. But yeah, they did finish with 69. It was pretty nice. And UNC does go on to win the title that year at least. So you lose to the champions. You're entering now into year 2 for Carla with legitimate shit to prove. Carla's a team player, so she has no issue with taking a little bit of a step back with the team this year. She goes from averaging 27 minutes a game to just 18, and her raw averages kind of fall in proportion with that. Barely just averages 8 points a game. But UConn as a team is on a mission this year. Entering January, they're undefeated, and ESPN executives see that they have a big open date on their calendar on MLK Day, where they have nothing scheduled. So they realize, hey, this UConn women's team, they're kind of doing something special down the road. We're headquartered in Bristol. Why don't we get Tennessee to come up and play UConn? And we'll do it number 1 versus number 2, and we'll market it as like the most important regular season game in the history of women's college basketball. UConn is like immediately game for this. And Pat Summitt is kind of not, because she's like, why would I want my team to, in the middle of conference season, fly all the way up to the Northeast to play in this game? But Pat Summitt, obviously, very well known for looking out for her team, but the other thing that she always looked out for is the game, the institution of women's basketball. And she realizes that in this moment, this game can be a big thing for this sport. And so she agrees. And in one of the first regular season nationally broadcast games ever for women's basketball, Tennessee visits UConn. UConn goes on to win this game 77-66 and kind of silence the critics for a little bit that say that they can't get it done against big competition. After that game, as I mentioned, UConn playing in a weaker conference, and there's really no drama the rest of the way. They don't win a game by less than 10, all the way on into the national championship, where they do get a rematch with Tennessee. On a neutral court, this game is played a little differently. First of all, UConn picks up some big foul trouble early on. Jen Rosati had 3 fouls by halftime. Rebecca Lobo had 3 fouls by halftime. And that meant that Gino had to go down the bench and he had to go to somebody that he trusted but hadn't played much that year, Carla Berube. This is where I need to say the lack of record keeping around women's basketball at this time is disgusting because I literally can't find the box score. Couldn't tell you a shot from the field. I can't tell you anything.
God damn.
All I have is there's an oral history that was written about this game like 3 years ago. So with 25 years having passed, as best as people remember, but with that early foul trouble, she comes in off the bench. And the way that Mel Greenberg described it, and he's a famous writer, historian of women's college basketball, she's kind of just like your classic middle relief pitcher coming in to eat a few innings. We're not expecting anything great. We just want you to keep us in the game until we get to the late parts and our big hitters can come up and hopefully win it for us. Based on the oral histories, she does exactly that. Enough so that when it does come down to the end of the game, she is trusted to still be in the finishing 5. UConn finally got the lead back with about 6 minutes left. It goes back and forth until Jen Rosati goes coast to coast for a layup with 1:30 left. This gives UConn the lead 63-62. It's then 68-64 with about 10 seconds left. UConn has a side out of bounds, and Gino draws it up to go to Carla to hit the all-important free throws with UConn facing a 1-1. And this is with, again, all of these stars that we mentioned. We got Jen Pizzotti, you got Rebecca Lobo. Basically, he was concerned that Tennessee's going to be over-pressuring on the two of them. I'm going to get a cleaner inbound to Carla. And also, to go with her quiet disposition, it was kind of to best compare it to somebody. It was the Tim Duncan sort of quietness. She was quiet in an unflappable way, where you could kind of tell the pressure of a moment isn't really going to affect her.
The Kawhi Leonard quietness as well.
A little bit of a Kawhi Leonard quietness. And I mean, and that honestly works well as an analogy too, because if you look at the statistics, she wasn't a particularly great free throw shooter, not a bad one by any means. She shot 70% as a freshman. She was 67% on the year entering that moment. But while she wasn't a great one, she certainly was a nice one, because in year 1 as a freshman, she did make 69 free throws. And as she steps to the line here with the national championship on the line, she has made 67 thus far on the year. With the benefit of hindsight and statistical analysis that is irrefutable, we all know what she was going to do with those 2 free throws. Sinks both of them. She puts them up 6 with 10 seconds left, basically puts the game away. And when Tennessee misses coming back down, UConn is able to dribble out the clock, and they win it 70-64 for the first national championship in the history of the program.
I mean, given what is going to come from that program, for the fact that like Coffin's final nail is put in by this relatively anonymous person compared to the rest, and given like what a changing of the guard moment that is very cool for her to be in the middle of it.
Well, and the fact that they trusted her in that moment, right? I think that says a lot about her as well. When the team got back to Connecticut, they had a hero's welcome. You know, there were people lined up at the airport when they got back. They ended up having a parade, and all of that was great. But what Carla looked back on most fondly was after they got done with all the media stuff and they got back to the hotel, The whole team went into Gino's hotel room and they just popped in the game tape for one last film review together. That was like Gino's joke. Like he was like, everybody, my room stat, team meeting, mandatory film review, kind of like in a jokingly, curmudgeonly way. And over a bunch of pizzas, Gino's like freezing and it's like, oh, like you missed this rotation, you missed that. And like they're all just like laughing about it. She looks back on that as like her fondest memories. Like she compared it to you had the family together and you whipped out the home movies and you're just pausing and laughing at everything. And that's kind of one of the beautiful things about college sports too, is a lot of the people end up coming back. Obviously, Carla's only a sophomore, but it's the last time that team was together in that kind of way. But again, as I said, she's only a sophomore. So that burgeoning UConn legacy, she has the ability to add to it even more and contribute some more. 96 gets a little bit more playing time. It ticks up. She gets about 20 minutes a game, averages 9 points, 4.5 boards, 3 assists. Again, very solid contributor. They again go to the Final Four, and this time in that national semifinal, they get the rematch with Tennessee. It's another classic back and forth. The record keeping, again, is very poor, but what I can tell you is Tennessee wins a classic 88-83 in overtime to end the UConn hunt for the repeat. Tennessee goes on to win that year when they beat Georgia in the final. For her senior year, Carla is named the team captain, and in her leadership role, she sees her playing time re-elevated to freshman year levels. She ends up being a starter for her senior year, plays 26 minutes a game, averages a career high 11.5 points a game to go with 5.2 boards, 3.1 assists. And yet again, this is a UConn team that is on a mission. They get through the regular season undefeated. They get through the conference tournament undefeated. They go all the way to the Elite Eight without any problems until a Tennessee team that had a down year and was seeded third meets them in the Elite Eight.
So this is 3 straight years of, well, okay, I don't want to assume that they're going to lose in the Elite Eight, but if this were to be the end of the season, that's 3 straight years of the season ending against Tennessee one way or the other.
They do meet with Tennessee, and if you do know your women's college basketball history, you do know that this was the second of a three-peat that Pat Summitt and the Lady Vols would go on.
Yeah, there it is.
So they do beat UConn 91-81 to bring an end to Carla Berube's senior season.
Not to clown on Carla at all, but it's a little funny that the season they were most successful is the one with the least amount of Carla on the floor.
There's a certain irony to it, for sure. But also then the irony applies in the sense that her most meaningful contribution to the team was also in that year when she steps in off the bench, plays quality minutes at the end of the first half to keep them in it, and then hits those clinching free throws. So even at UConn, we can see she's not the best as a star. She's the best as a role player. And she does get a chance to be a role player for a little bit more. She gets drafted by the New England Blizzard of the American Basketball League, which was an early predecessor / competitor of the WNBA. Plays 2 seasons there, plays just over 40 games, averages 2.5 points a game, and the league folds, which kind of leaves her at a crossroads. Does she get out of the sport of basketball entirely, or does she continue on and see what other opportunities might exist? She ends up taking kind of just a gap year to evaluate everything. And she ultimately lands at Providence, where she becomes an assistant coach. Spends 2 years there on the bench when she gets an opportunity to be a head coach for the first time, but it's at Division III Tufts University.
TUFTS, Tufts. That's part of the fight song because my mom went there.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah.
So do you know the name of the teams there?
Is it not the Jumbos?
They're the Jumbos, the Tufts Jumbos.
Yeah, it's Jumbo the Elephant.
An absolutely elite program with an elite mascot. But when Carla arrives there, certainly not an elite women's basketball team. Never really had any kind of success of any level. And she ends up kind of on her own Gino Auriemma trajectory. First 3 years, just building this program up, laying the foundation. By her 4th year, she gets them into the NCAA tournament. And they go from obscurity to pretty regular national title contenders. We get 9 trips to the Sweet 16. We get 7 trips to the Elite Eight, 4 Final Fours, and 2 title game appearances, but never the title. It still eludes her. Despite that, in 2015, she was named the D3 National Coach of the Year, and she was also named the head coach of the U.S. Women's U17 team. So being very trusted within the women's basketball circles to provide coaching to the youth and obviously being recognized for her success on that D3 level. So while that title eludes her at Tufts, it will continue to elude her, unfortunately, because she's no longer the head coach at Tufts. She's now the head coach at Princeton. She has been the head coach at Princeton for the past 5 years. She took over when Courtney Bainhart left to go to UNC. And what's important to know about the Princeton women's basketball program is Courtney Bainhart is very much the Gino Auriemma of the Princeton program. They never made an NCAA tournament before Courtney Bainhart got there. By the time she left, they had made the tournament in 8 of 10 years, and the only 2 years that they didn't make it, they made the WNIT, which they had also previously never made. So Courtney Bainhart took this program all the way up, and when she leaves to go to UNC, they decide to now entrust Carla with keeping this program at that same kind of level. She hasn't kept the program at the same level, I have to say, because she has elevated it. Princeton is even better than they've ever been before.
Her first year. For a second.
No. Her first year, they went 26-1. They went undefeated in the Ivy, and then COVID happens, and the tournament didn't happen. But 26-1, 14-0. That whole second year, the Ivy League is one of the leagues that chooses not to participate in college basketball. And she said that hunger is kind of what contributed to that team coming in 21-22 and running the table again in the Ivy League. So she starts her career 28-0 in the Ivy League, which is a very solid mid-major conference for women's college basketball, it has to be said. And she's making it look easy. They go in as an 11 seed in that 2022 tournament, and they knock off a Kentucky team that had just beaten South Carolina in the SEC conference title game. So certainly not light work. And with that, they got a date with 3-seeded Indiana. With a win, they would advance to face Gino Auriemma and the UConn Huskies. Unfortunately, they lose a heartbreaker 56-55, and we do not get the rematch. I shouldn't say we don't get it, because we actually do get it the following season in the regular season. Princeton gets scheduled to take a visit to UConn. We get the reunion between Carla and Gino. And her squad fights really hard, but they lose 69-64 to UConn. This year, it's really tough times for the Tigers in the Ivy League. They only go 12-2. By the time the conference tournament rolls around, they gather themselves. They end up winning it, get a 10 seed. They beat NC State and then hang tight but lose to 2-seed Utah for the 2023 tournament. And as we speak, Carla Berube is looking forward to another NCAA tournament game, this time with their highest seed yet. They're on the 9 line. They're going to go against West Virginia. If they win, she will get a chance to do the impossible and beat Iowa and Caitlin Clark.
Ooh, she's part of the Caitlin Clark saga this year.
She very well may be. Depends. I would feel very confident about the Tigers beating WVU. So again, quantum time mechanics, if you found a way to listen to this before Monday when these games will have already happened. Actually, for the women, I think the women do the women start Monday?
If you have time, slam it immediately, folks. Put that last
if you have
bracket
time,
in.
Slam Princeton against WVU. Maybe don't slam them against Iowa. And, obviously with the Carla Berube story, there's still a lot more to be written. She's only 48 years old. There's already been allusions and hints that when Gino Auriemma chooses to hang it up, he's going to be one of the people to get a call from UConn. So certainly Carla Berube yet could enter into the national consciousness in a way that I'll even start making the case against myself. She might end up becoming too good to guy. But as we currently stand now, we can look at this career that Carla Berube has had, and we can say that she was an essential piece of that first UConn team to finally get over the hump. She continues to do a great deal in the women's college basketball scene, and I think she's one hell of a guy to remember from those UConn teams. Carla Berube.
Carla Berube, much like there's shades of Walt Hazard, I feel like, in being at the part of this dynasty, him UCLA, her UConn, going on to have something on there, her 2 years in the ABL, his NBA career, but to like not be in any way the central figure of the memories of those dynastic teams, despite the importance and like being the spark that ignites it.
Exactly. They're the people that when UConn women's basketball fans gather at a bar in stores and they're reminiscing on the team, when the one guy chimes in from the side, hey, and don't forget Carla Berube, everybody goes and thinks he's like, oh, that guy fucking knows what he's talking about.
That guy knows.
That's
Paul.
who Carla Berube is.
He knows Paul. He knows Guy. I know that last week there was quite a bit of spice from Xavier, so I want to go ahead and cede the floor to him so we can just be the immediate retort to Diaz. I want to see how this goes.
Hey, that's fine. I appreciate that because, I might already have some spice about this one as well, but I'll save that for the end. Obviously, as Diaz said, this topic was partly inspired by my righteous indignation about our recognition of John Scott and my desire to recognize guys who were better versions of John Scott. So what better person to bring than one of the most underappreciated defensive forwards of all time and someone I consider a true guy, Guy Carbonneau. It's a guy named Guy.
Coming in hot right off the bat.
I am pulling no punches today, and I want everyone to know this. Guy was born March 18th, 1960, so happy belated birthday. It was his 64th birthday was yesterday.
Hey, I re-skeeted it on Blue Sky without even knowing that it was coming up, so that was foreshadowing. Anyone who follows us there, hey, you can find all the links at bit.ly/remember that guy, all one word, all lowercase. Xavier, please continue.
Guy was born in Sept-Îles, Quebec, which is a small mining town in the far north coast region near the border with Labrador. Pretty much the middle of nowhere. But like most his age in Canada, he quickly takes to hockey. Eventually, he joins the Chicoutimi Saguines in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League in Saguenay, which is a city about halfway between Sept-Îles and Montreal. Still pretty much in the middle of nowhere, but at least a little bit closer to the cities. After a bit of an adjustment period over his first 2 years in major juniors, Guy explodes during the 1978-79 season, where he puts up 62 goals and 79 assists as a center in 72 games. After this season, he gets drafted in the third round, number 44 overall by the Montreal Canadiens. He is the fifth player from the QMJHL drafted behind Ray Burke at number 8, Jimmy Mann 19, Kevin Lowe at 21, and Mark Hardy at 30. The next season, Guy stays in major juniors, and it's even better for him. He puts up a staggering 182 points in 72 games with 72 goals and 110 assists.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a pretty good amount. But in what may have been a sign of things to come, Guy finishes behind Jean-François Sauvé for the top scorer trophy by 5 points, and behind Denis Savard for most valuable player. So, puts up 182 points, still gets no awards whatsoever. After this season, Canadiens, who are coming off of 4 Stanley Cup wins in a row, don't really have room, so they send him to Nova Scotia, to their AHL team, the Voyageurs. In his first season in the AHL, he continues to excel. He finishes 6th in the league in scoring with 88 points, but 3rd on his own team behind Dan Doust and Dave Gorman. And the Canadiens say, all right, you're looking really good. We can't argue with your stats over the past 3 years and major juniors in the AHL, but we think you could use a little more seasoning. So they sent him back to AHL for the next season, which he's not really a fan of, but what is he going to do at that point? He says, all right, I guess I just have to go continue to prove myself. He goes back to Nova Scotia, once again, has a great season. And after this, the Canadiens say, okay, maybe Guy is ready to contribute. Now, as fans of hockey will know, scoring was insanely high in the 80s and early 90s. The game was really fast-paced. Obviously, we still had a lot of goons and big hits at that time, but during the 81-82 season, average goals per game was 4.01, which is the only time in the last 80 years it's been over 4. For context, scoring averages stayed in the high 3s until 94, 95 when it finally dropped to 2.99. And then from 96 to 2017, scoring averages were under 3 every year, including a 7-year stretch where it didn't even break 2.8. So scoring now, much different than scoring then. It's about like a 30 to 40% increase during that time compared to what we're used to now. And because of this, Montreal didn't need Guy to score. They already had a Guy for that, Guy Lafleur. Instead,
too many Guys.
There are a lot of Guys. And they tell him, we actually want you to be a defensive forward, which is rare. You don't see a lot of defensive centers. You'll see defensive wingers, but defensive centers not as common. They say, you're going to be forechecking. It's going to be your job to defend against all of the extremely high-scoring forwards of this era, of which there are a lot of, and we will get into later. Guy says, I'll do whatever I need to get on this team. And by his second season, he's already getting down-ballot Selke Award votes. He's very, very good at this. By his third season, he's getting first-place votes for the Selke Award. And then in 1985-86, finishes 5th on the team with scoring with 56 points, which is half of leader Mats Naslund. Finishes 3rd in the Selke Award voting. And the Canadiens win the Stanley Cup. Over the next 4 years, he finally gets over that hump. He wins the Selke Award twice, including back-to-back in 87-88 and 88-89, and finishes runner-up the other 2 times. The 88-89 season was statistically his best, like according to both traditional stats and advanced analytics. 26 goals, 30 assists for a plus-minus of 37. Only 44 penalty minutes, despite, leading the forecheck. And he had a career-high point shares of 5, split nearly evenly, 2.9 offensive and 2.1 defensive. He's really good at what he does. And due to his hardworking play, he quickly becomes a fan favorite. Canadiens fans repurposed the chant that they originally had for Guy Lafleur, which was just chanting Guy, Guy, Guy whenever he touches the puck. So now whenever our Guy touches the puck, it's Guy, 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 calling out from the rafters at the Forum.
It's a flock of geese.
It is a flock of geese. But like I mentioned earlier, due to the massive logjam of scoring centers in the NHL at the time, despite how good Guy is, and despite everyone recognizing this, he does not make an all-star game. There were defensive wingers who produced less than Guy and were named all-stars because their teams needed representatives, or those positions were just less stacked. This includes Canadiens captain Bob Gainey. He was named a 4-time All-Star and 4-time Selke Award winner as a left winger, despite scoring under 40 points in essentially all of those seasons. Guy is up in the mid-50s, producing more, and being just as good defensively. Never gets any of that recognition, because here were the centers that were named to the All-Star game during these seasons. Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier, Mario Lemieux, Pat LaFontaine, Ron Francis, Peter Stastny, Steve Yzerman.
Yeah, I mean, what you gonna do?
Yeah, so he is a victim of the fact that they said, you are going to be a defensive center. And even though you're the best in the league, that's not what we want at the All-Star game. We want these guys who are international stars who will score 200 points a season. We'll leave the wingers to be the defensive guys and give guys who are worse than you a chance, and not you. It is what it is, but that's what you're going to have to deal with, Guy. After the retirement of Bob Gainey, the Habs named Guy and Chris Chelios co-captains prior to the 1989-1990 season. Pretty nondescript season, and then Chelios gets traded. So Guy becomes the sole captain of the Montreal Canadiens. 91-92 season, wins the Selke Award for the 3rd time. And this is also the 8th consecutive season where he finishes in the top 5 for voting. Still no All-Star games. In the 92-93 season, Guy captains the Canadiens to their 24th and, as of today, still most recent Stanley Cup. After a pretty middling season where they finished 3rd in the Adams division, 4th overall in the Wales Conference, because, again, at that point it was Wales and Campbell and not East and West, they cruised through the playoffs. They beat the local rival Nordiques 4-2, sweep the Sabres 4-0, beat the Islanders 4-1 before facing off against Wayne Gretzky and the Los Angeles Kings in the Stanley Cup final. In the first game, Gretzky has 4 points in a 4-1 win. So Guy goes to coach Jacques Demers and says, put me up against Gretzky. I don't need to score goals, but we need to stop him scoring them. And if we do this, it'll free up Vinny and Kirky, which is Kirk Muller and Vincent Damphouse, 2 all-stars, to do what they do best. Jacques says, okay, we'll try it and see how it works. In the next 4 games, Gretzky has 1 goal and 2 assists total, and the Canadiens win all 4 for a gentleman's sweep.
The French, famously quite good at taking care of kings and other royals.
Indeed. And they just decided, hey, Guy, you stop Wayne Gretzky, the greatest player of all time.
Guillotine Carbonneau? Is this anything?
It could be. Unfortunately, Guy does not get the Conn Smythe trophy, but, maybe he should have with how much he pestered and stopped Gretzky after that first game.
You're proposing that he basically gets the Andre Iguodala Finals MVP against LeBron.
Yes. He deserved it, in my opinion. He played a massive role just outside of the finals themselves. He also had 2 overtime game winners during the playoffs, in Game 2 against the Sabres and in Game 3 against the Islanders. So it's not just defensive. He won 2 games during that period. In fact, they set the record for most overtime wins in one playoff, where they won 10 overtime games during that playoff stretch. After one more season with the Canadiens, they do decide to trade their captain. So they trade Guy for noted guy, Jim Montgomery.
Boston's Bruin head coach, Jim Montgomery. Here's the thing. Now that he's Boston Bruins head coach, there's a lot more love lost.
But at this point, he was just Jim Montgomery
True.
on the St. Louis
Main
Blues.
legend. Yeah.
So Guy plays 1 season with the Blues. And after that, he does then move to the Dallas Stars. So this is Dallas, just a couple of years after they moved from Minnesota. They dropped the North Stars. They're just the Stars. And they were really bad in 95-96. They only had 66 points. They finished right near the bottom of the standings. But for people who know hockey, Dallas then explodes, becomes one of the best teams in the Western Conference over the next 4 or 5 years. Thanks to players like Mike Modano. And with the now 38, 39-year-old Guy still playing important minutes, the Stars win their first and only Stanley Cup in the 1998-99 season, sweeping the Edmonton Oilers. Guy played the entire series with a broken wrist, which feels like something that's hard to do if you have to hold a stick and check people.
Yeah, specifically defensive stick handling.
But he did it. They win that title. That's Guy's 3rd Stanley Cup. Dallas goes back to the Stanley Cup final in the 99-2000 season against the Devils. They do lose this one, but that isn't really the most interesting thing that happens with Guy that season. So that year, Dallas has a rookie winger named Brendan Morrow, who would also go on to have a very Guy-like career, and I could have brought him for this day as he played nearly 1,000 NHL games, 600 points, Olympic gold medal, no All-Star games. But I bring up Brendan Morrow this time because he started dating Guy's daughter, Anne-Marie, after meeting at a team function.
Dude, don't fucking set up some Disney sports movie where you're dating your teammate's daughter. Don't do it.
So now we have the elder statesman of the team and the rookie of the team, and the rookie is dating the elder statesman's daughter. Guy was actually really chill about this. When he was asked if Morrow's relationship with his daughter had created awkward feelings in the locker room, he said, no, not at all. She's an adult. She can do what she wants. That was good because, according to Guy, everyone else was giving Morrow a ton of shit about this, and he didn't need any more. But it works out because Morrow and Anne-Marie end up getting married 2 years later, and they've been together ever since with 3 kids. So it all started thanks to a team function because this 39-year-old and this 20-year-old were on the same team.
It is weird how sometimes athletes do get the experience that you get only really in other places like retail where, as a 20-year-old, your best friend is some 50-year-old that works the exact same shifts.
Guy does end up retiring after the Stanley Cup final loss to the Devils at the age of 40. He has 19 NHL seasons, 1,318 games, 260 goals, 403 assists for 663 career points. But as with most people who have been in a sport that long, Guy doesn't leave hockey because he immediately becomes an assistant coach for the Montreal Canadiens. And he's there for 2 years before Dallas says, actually, Guy, we want you back. We liked you so much when we were having here. Please become our assistant GM. And he says, okay, I will go back to Dallas. And he is their assistant GM for 4 years before Montreal says, no, Guy, we want you back here where you belong. Old captain and teammate Bob Gainey, who is now the Habs general manager, brings him back to be the head coach, replacing Claude Julien. After just missing the playoffs in his first season by 2 points, Guy takes the Habs from 10th in the East to 1st in the 07-08 season. The Canadiens beat Boston in the first round before losing to Diaz's Flyers in the conference semis. He finishes second in the Jack Adams voting, just behind Bruce Boudreau, who benefited from the fact that he took over a very bad Washington Capitals team that had a young man named Alexander Ovechkin on it, who scored 65 goals and had 112 points that season.
And also it scored 20 goals this season.
Yes. The voting for the Jack Adams Award that year was Bruce Boudreau, finishing first with 208 points, with 31 first place votes, 15 second, and 8 third. Guy Carbonneau with 196 points, with 24 firsts, 23 seconds, and 7 thirds. And then Mike Babcock of Detroit with 65. So it was pretty much a 2-horse race. And unfortunately, once again, Guy does not really get the recognition he probably deserved. And fun fact, son-in-law Brendan Morrow, who has now gone and tailored his style after his father-in-law, finishes 7th in the Selke voting that year with 4 first-place votes. It is a family of defensive forwards who deserve recognition. Unfortunately, the very next season, Guy gets Bob Hilled by Gainey, who fires him with Montreal in 5th place in the East with a month to go to replace him with himself. And it promptly tanks the team. They go 6-6-4 over the last 16 games, barely make it into the playoffs on a tiebreaker, and then get swept by Boston in the first round.
See, when Greg Popovich stabs someone in the back, he turns it into a dynasty. He does not waste the bodies that he produces.
This was the man's captain who brought him back from Dallas, replaced him with himself, and made the team worse. And that is the last time Guy ever coaches. You would think that someone who led a team to first place, would have been in the playoffs the next year and got screwed over, would get another shot. But much like everything else, Guy does not ever coach again. That's pretty much it for Guy's career. He does a little bit of broadcasting, but not much of it, and he hasn't done it in a while. I do want to note, Guy is one of 9 players to have ever won multiple Selke Awards. Of the other 8 not named Guy Carbonneau, they have a combined 25 All-Star Game selections, which is a ton in a league where you're lucky if you get 2 or 3. And Guy has none, because he had the most underappreciated job going up against the greatest centers in the history of hockey. In an era when they were scoring 150 to 200 points, he was shutting them down while chipping in with 50 plus of his own. And his fans, and his teammates appreciated it. And even the guys he was going against, appreciated how good he was. Wayne Gretzky, Joe Sakic, they've all talked about, he was the best forward I ever went against. But he never got that recognition in terms of an all-star game. With this category being guys who never made all-star games, we have a Guy who never made an all-star game, who should have made one, and was slighted at every opportunity. And I really think that this is the time where we fix the wrongs of what we did before, take a guy who's actually good defensive forward, a Guy who's actually a good defensive forward, and bring him to the Hall of Guy or Hall of Guy, whatever you want to say, Guy Carbonneau should be a guy.
There's a Guy we can bring in, but there is also one more guy that we can bring in who, Xavier, as befitting this category, is equally unrecognized. Stop me if you've heard this before. It's early in the 21st century. The Angels are trying to stay relevant despite constantly missing the playoffs, wasting the skills of a multidisciplinary star, and also wasting the skills of a former Rookie of the Year slugger with a fishy last name. Mike Trout, unfortunately, 11-time All-Star, so definitely not being discussed in this category. That means I have to be talking about the one and only Timothy James Salmon.
Okay. All right.
We are going to talk about Tim Salmon, who was born in Long Beach, California, August 24th, 1968. Supposedly, those beaches there, that is where he has his superhero origin story, according to the OC Register. When he's 3, just walks out the house one day, missing for a couple hours. Family finally finds him watching baseball games nearby on the beach. So he's got the bug for it early on. Family, unfortunately, are going to split up. They're going to get divorced. Mom's going to go to Texas. Dad's going to go to Phoenix. Now, these are still 2 big baseball regions, and so he does continue to play. He's a 3-sport athlete in high school, but baseball is number 1, and it's going to allow him to get drafted in the 18th round in 1986. But he decides, I can do better than this. So he goes to college, Grand Canyon, with summers at the Cape Cod League. And this builds his stock up to get him to the nicest possible start to his pro career. In the 1989 draft, he is taken 69th overall by the California Angels. Sails through the minors pretty quickly, mostly on the merits of his bat. He is not particularly known for his fielding, which is out in right field primarily. He does get his jaw shattered in 1990 in A-ball. The doctor says that it was like broken glass in a sock, just looking at his jaw. But it gets reconstructed. I've seen pictures of him now, you can hardly tell. And he's able to then get right back on his trajectory, which, much like his namesake, the Salmon, eventually brings him back to whence he spawned when he returns to Southern California to make his debut with the Angels. At this time, they are still the California Angels. They are a franchise that is 30 years old, has not yet made the World Series, has only really had 2 superstars at this point, Nolan Ryan and Rod Carew, both of whom are also well known for stints with other teams, aren't quintessentially Angels. And they've only got 3 playoff appearances, with the last one being in 86 at this point. That year, they had a great person for last week's category, Wally Joyner, make his debut as a rookie, make an all-star team, lead them to the playoffs, big moment of hope. Tim Salmon coming up is the next exciting moment following that Wally Joyner debut for Angels fans. They are hype. It is being measured up to this, and in New York, he goes 0-4 in his debut, but later that week gets his first hit, first home run, finishes out this season with a classic, pretty disappointing cup of coffee, but allows him to get some major league reps. Much like Mike Trout, who's going to follow in his fishy footsteps, this mediocre September cup of coffee presages a much, much stronger rookie season the next year. 142 games as the everyday right fielder, 283, 382, 586 slash. That is good for a 143 OPS plus, and that performance is good enough for, at the time, just the 4th ever unanimous American League Rookie of the Year, making him the first Angel to win the award. And you want to talk about guys in clubs of excellence. The 3 Angels to have Rookie of the Year award are Shohei Ohtani, the greatest baseball player in history, Mike Trout, who up until Shohei Ohtani was coming around was trying to make a case for greatest baseball player in history, and Tim Salmon.
It feels very, the graphic where it's Thaddeus Young, LeBron James, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird.
I'm also picturing Tim Salmon being the 3rd Hydra head of the other 2, the goofy one looking next to the other 2 series. Now, if he's going to be a 0-time All-Star, this is a zero-sum game. That means other people are getting those spots. In 93, it's a stacked stars list. There's not much that could have been done. It's Griffey, Puckett, and Joe Carter. We're not going to argue with that. Devin White, a very good Toronto batter, also makes it in. The reigning home run leader, who's going to lead the league in home runs for a 2nd straight year, Juan Gonzalez, Albert Bell, and also Milwaukee's Greg Vaughn is taking one of the all-star spots this year during this torrid rookie campaign for Tim Salmon. So it's understandable, I think, this time for a rookie to not make it. 94 is a pretty rough start to the season. Hits that sophomore slump hard. OPS hits a season low 683 at the start of May when he approaches the hitting coach, Rod Carew. Pretty good hitting coach. Does something to change his approach, and the next week he is the American League Player of the Week with a 336 average. But had this slow start, so when we come to the All-Star game again, it's the same three starters as the last year, and then you've got Bell, you've got an Angels outfielder, Chili Davis, not Tim Salmon, and Kenny Lofton. So again, sort of understandable before the strike then ends that season early. 95, ahead of the All-Star break, through 69 games, nice. He is slashing 291, 423, 530. And the Angels are also pretty good. Like, the Angels are getting some national attention. They are 39 and 30. This, at the time, 952 OPS would be a career high. And it's a young career, but still, this would be like a good year for a former Rookie of the Year finding his way to make it in. You've got the starters of Bell, Lofton, and Puckett. Again, can't really argue with that. You've got Griffey. You've got Manny Ramirez, who means that we have the entire Cleveland outfield. You have New York's Paul O'Neill. Take some offense to that. He's having a good year, admittedly, but he is not the most egregious selection in this year because the last spot, same average, lower on base percentage, lower slugging, fewer home runs, more strikeouts, fewer stolen bases, fewer games, fewer walks. His Angels teammate, Jim Edmonds, makes it. I looked all through their reference pages, and the only thing I can find where if you were trying to find a statistical case for who should make it in, Jim Edmonds had a slight lead in RBI. In every other category, Tim Salmon takes the cake. I hope that is not the case. I have to admit, Buck Showalter was the AL manager for this, so presumably, since these were the reserves, he had some say in that. And Buck, you fucked up because Tim Salmon is left out for Jim Edmonds. I'm going to be a little bit less granular on the All-Star games. I just really got pissed off about the Jim Edmonds one. Salmon takes it in stride, finishes the season even better off. 330, 429, 594 by season's end for a 1024 OPS. Gets some down ballot MVP love, gets a Silver Slugger. The Angels go 78 and 67 to finish second in the West and miss the playoffs. But the next year, his All-Star splits, they're even better. He actually went out and got more RBI this time to really try and do it, but you can't stop the Cleveland trio. And also this year, Brady Anderson is hitting a suspiciously large number of home runs in Baltimore.
Well, I'm sure all Orioles fans will always love Brady Anderson and be happy about what he did that year and never be upset about it.
Should also mention this is the one All-Star appearance ever for Jay Buhner, but Jay Buhner is an appropriately one All-Star kind of guy. So another one where I kind of got to give it up. And so 97 comes around, and this is, I don't think any team's ever trying to set someone up to make an All-Star appearance, but if you were, you would move Tim Salmon into the cleanup spot to try and put him in the heart of the lineup as they do this year so that he can set a career high in all counting stats. However, this year there are far too many Yankees between Bernie Williams and Paul O'Neill, and perhaps the greatest injustice of all, David Justice making it in here. In 98, they're the Anaheim Angels now. And as we reach the Midsummer Classic, a new Angel makes it to the All-Star outfield. Hall of Guy inductee Darren Erstad. That does mean that once again, Tim Salmon is burned and does not make it in. And what is amazing for baseball in this category, as we've alluded to, some sports, it is more selective. In this sport, every team gets one. Tim Salmon has been plugging away as an absolute constant at the plate this whole time. And you would think, even if the team's bad, they're going to get one, but his
problem was that he wasn't a kicker at Nebraska.
He wasn't a kicker in Nebraska. This was the multidisciplinary star that I tried to throw in there earlier to take the Shohei spot. Yeah, now Erstad is taking these spots. Reliever Troy Percival, they have good relievers, which is one of the doomed things if you're a hitter on a mediocre team trying to make the All-Star game, because they'll always just take a star reliever for 1 year. So Troy Percival gets a couple as they go through 2000, even as Salmon is becoming the longest tenured Angel on this roster. He's becoming the elder statesman and continuing to post every year. He's averaging 132 games a season up to this point with an OPS plus never dipping below 119 over a full season. Keeps getting this down ballot MVP love, but keeps getting snubbed for the likes of Erstad. We've got guys in the outfield this time like BJ Surhoff, Maglio Ordonez, John Green, Ben Grieve, Jermaine Dye, Carl Everett. This list goes on, and it does not include Tim Salmon. But whether or not baseball can acknowledge he is a star, the Angels faithful know that he is going to be an all-timer in Angels lore. On August 18th, that year 2000, just before he turns 32, he hits home run number 223 off Roger Clemens. And this does make him at the time the all-time leader for the Angels franchise, to go with his rookie single-season record for most home runs. Coming into 2001, this is the first time since his rookie year where he's kind of had like a bad year. He had some off-season shoulder surgery, slowed him up, only has a 98 OPS plus over the full year, still puts up 1.7 more, but that's just not all-star caliber. So we can explain that one. And then we reach 2002. The Angels, they debut a new logo, and they've got a new good outlook on the season. They start 51-35 at the All-Star break. And they do get one All-Star, Garrett Anderson. Yet another Angels outfielder, following the likes of Chili Davis, following the likes of Darren Erstad, following in the likes of Jim Edmonds, to continue making this at the expense of Tim Salmon. Salmon watches from home as Anderson goes over 4 this year in the All-Star game. But the team, when they come back, they remain hot down the stretch. They go 48-28. The year before, they had finished 41 games out of first place, but that's mostly because the Seattle Mariners won 116 games. This year, the winner for the West only wins 103. The Angels only finish 4 behind them. The Oakland Athletics win the division, but the Angels win their first ever wildcard berth going into the 2002 playoffs. I had mentioned earlier parallels between Salmon and Wally Joyner there, the kind of hype that leads them off. Going back to that 86 rookie season, like, Salmon has fully outperformed Joyner, but he still has not done the one thing Joyner did in that first year, which is take the Angels to the playoffs. This is his first playoff appearance this entire time, and while he's been a big deal, while the lineup's been a big deal, the rotation to this point has allowed fewer runs than any other team in baseball. So that's what gets them there. But then it's the playoffs, and it turns into a slugfest against the Yankees in the ALDS. Yankees take game 1 8-5. They're leading late in game 2, but then the next 2 nights, they are able to mount late inning comebacks, the Angels do, behind the stellar bullpen performances of former All-Star Troy Percival and future All-Star, right now 20-year-old rookie phenom, Francisco K-Rod Rodriguez. Those late inning comebacks take them back to Anaheim. They eventually win game 4 to advance after a 3-1 gentleman's sweep. They go against the Twins and again drop game 1, but battle back thanks to that bullpen with another gentleman's sweep this time for the 7-game series. And that sends them to the 2002 World Series to face Barry Bonds' San Francisco Giants. And at this point, Tim Salmon's going 8 for 33 with 4 walks. He's been fucking ass this playoff run. Like the offense is entirely, it's Darren Erstad, Garrett Anderson again. It is their third base, 2-time All-Star Troy Glaus. Those guys are carrying the offense. And game 1, it just gets even worse for Salmon. He goes 0 for 4 with a strikeout. He's batting .216 in the playoffs, coming into game 2 with them down 1-0 after dropping that first game to the Giants. And then his bat wakes up in a big way. He's 4 for 4 with 2 home runs and a walk, 4 RBI, and they need every single one of those because the Angels do manage to hold on for an 11-10 win against the Giants. The next night, he goes 1 for 4 with a walk, but he scores both times. Then he reaches base in a 10-4 win. Angels drop game 4, 3-4. They drop game 5, 16-4. And coming back to Anaheim, they are staring down elimination 5-0, bottom of the 7th in game 6. But then the rally monkey goes up on the screen. Russ Ortiz comes in for the Giants with 2 runners on, immediately gets smacked for a 3-run home run. Erstad ties it up with a solo shot in the next inning, and Salmon comes as the tying run to the plate. He is eventually, once he reaches base, pinch run for it with Sean Figgins, but that tying run does eventually score there in the bottom of the inning, the same hit that scores that tying run. It also scores the go-ahead off the bat of Anderson. In game 7, it's 1-1 in the third. Garrett Anderson hits a bases-clearing 3-run double that Tim Salmon is on base for. He scores amongst the others, and that leads to the Angels becoming the 2002 World Series champs. Slashes 288, 382, 525 during that postseason after that abysmal start. And in the World Series, 346, 452, 615. But the number one number that I want to look at for a moment, and this is going to be one of the ones, Diaz, that you do not like because it is not on the normal stat sheet, but it's a number that matters, and that's CWPA, which is championship win probability added. The person who impacted the odds of that team to win the championship more than anyone else. It's not All-Stars, Garrett Anderson, Troy Percival, Darren Erstad. It's none of them. It's not K-Rod. It's not any member of this rotation that allowed fewer runs than anyone in the American League. It is not even World Series MVP Troy Glaus. It is Tim Salmon with 21.95%, second only in the series to Barry Bonds, which really does underscore how fucking incredible Barry Bonds was in an ultimately futile effort in that 2002 World Series.
WPA is, I saw a video one time that it was like for the 2023 divisional round, what were like the top 10 plays for win probability added. And watching it, the order made sense. I thought it was very fair. So of all of the silly advanced analytics, WPA at least has the best marketing team because I'm in.
So Tim Salmon leads in that. And to this day, again, he leads in a lot of things in the franchise. That kind of cachet with the franchise will help carry him forward here because while we have agonized about some of those all-star snubs, simply put, going forward, there is not as much snubbing because we're in the twilight of his career. There is no Disney happy ending here. Part of that is because Disney sells the team following the 2002 World Series. But part of that is just the ravages of time. They start platooning him with Jeff Devannon. Vlad Guerrero comes in there to compete for, the obligatory all-star appearance that people are going to get every once in a while. He misses all of 05 with a second shoulder surgery in his career. And as a 37-year-old in 2006, he does come in as a non-roster invitee and make the DH spot for 76 games. He eventually, in September of that year, on the 28th, announces his retirement, which comes 3 days later. His last game, his name and number, they're out on the field. Tim Salmon is beloved in the Halo faithful world because at the time, again, he's the franchise leader in home runs. He has been since passed by Mike Trout. He was at the time, their first franchise rookie of the year. He's been since passed by Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani. Here's a fun one. His number was unofficially retired until just last year when in 2023, Randall Grichuk wore 15 for the first time since Tim Salmon. Tim Salmon is technically the second to last person to wear that number right now. I'm just saying, just putting that out there. I also want to give a moment to just put the timeliness of Tim Salmon here right now. He is still the franchise leader in walks for the Angels with 970. Mike Trout is 964. So Tim Salmon is not going to have that record for much longer, but we can honor Tim Salmon for a little bit longer with that. If I may throw just a couple more numbers out. 3 different years. Down ballot MVP votes. He gets 5 Hall of Fame votes in his 1 year of eligibility. His career splits. He has an 883 OPS in the first half and an 884 OPS in the second half. That does not explain it. I tried to find a reason as to, again, why he wasn't selected, why others were. I went to see where he stacks up all time. And if you search StatHead, all time, people that didn't make an all-star game by WAR, he's only 78th. But then you notice at the top, there's some guys like Ty Cobb, Tris Speaker. You have to eliminate everyone from before the All-Star game. Those folks can't count. If you look at players since 1933 by career WAR without an All-Star appearance, coming in at number 2 is Tim Salmon. And the only person who's behind is an 18-year veteran named Tony Phillips, who had to play 500 more games. Tony Phillips was a teammate of Tim Salmon's twice, by the way. Once in 97 when they were the Anaheim Angels. Once in 95 with the California Angels. This is wild for just one split second. I'm sorry that I'm getting on Tony Phillips here. It is still also about Tim Salmon because in 1995, when Jim Edmonds is just across the board poorer than Tim Salmon, also Tony Phillips has better stats than Jim Edmonds for the same team, the California Angels. Jim Edmonds is the 3rd best outfielder that they have. And for whatever reason, he's the one outfielder that makes the All-Star game. The 1995 All-Star selection of Jim Edmonds has become my new Rick Porcello, Cy Young, most undeserved thing of all time. We're getting besides the point though. Tim Salmon, much like Isaiah Thomas might put it, while he met the criteria to be selected, he was not selected. Much like Ann Vaughters, I wanted to try and find as successful as a person to not get this acknowledgement as possible. or to get the bare minimum of acknowledgement. While I know Xavier did the same, I do think that what we've got here is maybe the greatest baseball player to ever not make an all-star team. Certainly, he is at least good enough to be my guy for the zero-time all-stars today. Please accept my fish friend, Tim Salmon.
I do like Tim Salmon. I think that off the bat, we can just get rid of Carla Berube.
Whoa!
You picked someone who never had the chance to go to an all-star game because none existed.
Did the ABL not have all-star games?
The ABL had all-star games. The ABL had all-star games.
So you picked someone who played 2 professional years and didn't go to an all-star game versus 2 sports lifers who put up very good numbers and were just never given a chance to go to an all-star game.
Okay, so yes, that was the original vein of what I wanted to go for. And as I said in our chat, I originally wanted to go for Mahmoud, who was a great basketball player, but then I saw that he thinks Israel did 9/11. We can't be remembering that guy.
No,
so I had to pivot.
Remember that guy.
I had to pivot, and we landed on Carla Berube, who, in that kind of vein, was not ever a featured player on UConn, but was an underappreciated contributor. It's the best angle that I had. I don't think we should just outright dismiss her. I don't like the hand.
In her one full professional
season,
she had 2.7 points per game. She had 2.7 points per game in her one full professional season.
She still spiritually fits. She absolutely fits this category. I'm here saying I think it's between Guy Carbonneau and Tim Salmon, with all due respect. I think you've got a little of your pro Tigers just across all sports bias going here with the Princeton love.
Look, and that's totally fair, and that's fine. I'm not saying that Carla Berube wins. I'm just saying Carla Berube doesn't get outright dismissed.
No. You know what Carla Berube doesn't have that would help her out is a WBIT appearance.
All I'm saying is that Carla Berube doesn't have an all-star appearance in the same way that I don't have an all-star appearance.
Whoa.
So, okay, you're giving yourself a bit of credit.
All I'm saying is one full professional season, 2.7 points per game, and then gone.
Also, for the record, there were 3 planned American Basketball League ABL All-Star games. First one, 96, West beats the East. Second one, 98, East beats the West. Third one in 99 never happens because the league ceases operations a month ahead of time.
So she wasn't even there for the one season that she actually played. Is the one season they didn't have an All-Star game.
She played 2 seasons.
She was done after in 98. She was cut for the All-Star game after only playing 11 games. So
the 97 her own John Scott campaign, and she did.
The 97 season, the only one that she played a full season, did not have an all-star game, and she averaged 2.7 points.
You know, Diaz, what I'm hearing here is that Xavier is not confident enough in his own argument and really needs to attack yours, which I think means he's shivering. He's shivering in his boots in the face of Tim Salmon's overwhelming pescatarian power.
James, I'll let you be happy about Tim Salmon, but no, I was just trying to save us some time by getting rid of the person that clearly doesn't fit the category.
Look, here's what I'll say. Again, I don't like the way that you just said that, but here's what I will say. I wanted us to spend at least a decent amount of time talking about Carla Berube. I think we have satisfied that. My closing statement is, I'm not saying that she isn't third. She's third. All I'm saying is she's not disqualified.
No, she earned third place. She did not finish with $0 on Jeopardy.
Okay. And with that being said,
this was a gutsy call by Diaz to go with this person immediately after the anger I had at his previous. And I appreciate the fact that Diaz just goes for it. I do appreciate it.
Much like the last one, you're just focusing on the negative about these guys. I haven't heard you try and fight for your boy.
Oh, I mean, the fight for my boy is that he's the greatest defensive forward of all time. And much worse defensive forwards kept getting recognized as all-stars because they just happened to play on teams that needed one representative. Or his own captain, who was a worse version of him, gets the spot for the Canadians, who then fucking Bob Hill, Greg Popovich is him 20 years later to then just be worse than what Greg Popovich did. It's one thing if, as you said, Bob Gainey took over and then it was like, hey, I may have screwed you out of multiple All-Star appearances and fired you thinking I could do a better job and then did a better job. But actually, I was just worse than you at everything we've done and got much more recognition in my career for doing a worse job than you've done. But no hard feelings, man. No hard feelings, Guy.
Yeah, Pop proves it was at least the right decision.
Evgeny, not the right decision. Just a very narcissistic
Tim Salmon,
man.
the right decision.
Tim Salmon,
the ontologically correct decision.
Tim Salmon also overshadowed by...
I can't get over the
his own
1995
outfield.
Jim Edmonds selection. I cannot get over that. Like the Garrett Anderson one, you look at the slash stats at that point in the season, it kind of makes sense.
Garrett Anderson has 3
Erstad,
All-Star selections.
Sure. I'm saying that particular season, 2002, and he overshadows him. But like him, the Chili Davis one, I get it. Darren Erstad, sure. The 95 Jim Edmonds, like, I got upset writing about that.
And I get that. I also got upset when I looked at the list of people who've won the Selke Award multiple times, and it's like 5 All-Stars, 6 All-Stars, 5 All-Stars, 5 All-Stars, 4 All-Stars. And then we have Guy Carbonneau, and it's like, no, he gets 0. Every other person who's been a Selke Award winner has gotten an All-Star, except for Guy Carbonneau and Michael Pekka, who at least got the nickname Captain Crunch, so he had something going for him. But...
I mean, Guy Carbonneau got 3 Stanley Cup rings. I don't think he had nothing going for him.
He did, but he still got overlooked by the rest of the world. There was no value put on defense, despite the fact that he was the only person that could deal with people like Gretzky and Messier and Stastny and Joe Sakic. Especially coming off of one where it's like we inducted a guy who's a bad defensive forward, and we have the greatest defensive forward of all time who, because people only cared about offense, never got an All-Star appearance. Like, that dichotomy just, to me, is, if we're going to do that for John Scott, we got to give something to Guy Carbonneau to kind of offset what we have done, the crimes that we have committed.
I'll go back to the 2002 World Series. Before people get to Tim Salmon, they're probably going to think of K-Rod. They're probably going to think of the fucking rally monkey. They might think of Vladimir Guerrero, which is wild because he's not on that team, but people will probably insert that before they finally reach Tim Salmon, who's basically with Mike Trout, the 2 fish like Pisces swimming together at the top of almost every single Angels franchise leaderboard.
I also want to say, John Scott was a defenseman.
John Scott was not a defenseman at that point. He was into the All-Star game as a forward. I can tell you that right now.
Okay, but that's silly All-Star rules. Look.
No, it's not silly All-Star rules because John Scott was literally listed as a forward all season long. Defensive. I double-checked this before I chose Guy Carbonneau. You cannot trust me on this.
Fair.
I'm Tim Salmon. That there are 2 one-syllable first name, fish last name, like all-timers at the top of every Angels leaderboard is just so good. He's the other fish guy in the Angels history.
I do like Tim Salmon. I don't want to hate on Tim Salmon. I just like Guy Carbonneau more. And my anger has re-arisen from the John Scott thing because my pitch for Guy Carbonneau is literally to just fix what we did wrong 2 weeks ago. The world needs to be balanced. Right now it is not balanced, but it would be balanced if we bring Guy Carbonneau into the Hall.
Here's what I'll say, because, again, this seems like I'm going to be the deciding vote. And I'm not going to go to ChatGPT this time. And here's what I'm going to do instead.
Cantor just like let out a little woo!
Here's what I'm going to say. If, Xavier, your argument is that we must give recognition where it has not been given. Guy Carbonneau is in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
It took him 19 years, and it was pretty much everyone having to pitch in, be like, hey, he did not get any recognition for how great he was.
They crowdfunded his Hall of Fame spot.
He didn't get any recognition except for the ultimate recognition that a hockey player could ever aspire to have for the recognition of their career.
Hey guys, please go check out the GoFundMe to get to the Hockey Hall of Fame.
And 10 years after his coaching career was ended after being backstabbed by his previous captain and teammate.
The
And
backstabbing is tough.
he got Bob Hilled by a guy who was worse than him.
But you also wouldn't vote for Bob Hill back in the day.
We all make mistakes at some point in our life, James. I have grown. The Bob Hill story has grown on me so much.
It's
in
incredibly
the 2
good.
years. I do like the Bob Hill story. It just, I think the difference there is that Popovich, not a single Spurs fan, despite feeling anything bad for Bob Hill, would ever trade that in the world.
Never.
Also, Bob Gainey is the only Hall of Fame forward to have less points than Carbonneau. So he literally was just worse than Carbonneau at every single thing he did and got all of the recognition before him.
Should we real quick ban Gainey?
I would love to ban Bob Gainey.
Bob Gainey is banned from the Hall of Guy. Let's just get that out of the way real quick there.
I appreciate that. And I don't know how Montreal people feel about Bob Gainey at this point.
Fight us. Come fight us, Montreal people. Whatever. They're French Canadian. We can take them.
I do just love this, though. On March 9th, 2009, Gainey named himself the coach of the Montreal Canadiens. The idea that you can do that is the biggest
This is just really what
move.
I think we need for this playoff run. No, what you need for the playoff run is the leader in championship win probability added for the 2002 World Series.
Name Tim Salmon the head coach of the Montreal Canadiens. That's what we're talking about here. He couldn't get that.
Timothée Salmon.
The Sixers did that fucking thing with TJ DeLeo's dad once. They fired the coach and they put in Tony DeLeo. Incredible. Bob Gainey will never be in. And I'm not saying Guy Carbonneau will never be in, but I'm saying right now, Guy Carbonneau. How dare I mispronounce his name as Guy? Because, again, at this moment, I'm saying no for Guy.
I'm just happy that you didn't use ChatGPT this time, because I would have been really pissed if you ChatGPT'd this.
Your Carbonnotion has run out of fizz. Huh?
I mean, you've already won, James. You don't need
maybe I should stop. Maybe I should quit while I'm ahead. I get it.
No, look, not to diminish Guy's contribution to hockey, and certainly on relitigation, it could be relitigation this time around. I'm not ruling him out, but what I am saying is Tim Salmon occupies the space where he is arguably the third greatest Angel of all time, and yet he's never made an All-Star game. That's really what this week was all about, and I want to, in acknowledgement of also the incredible name, because it is really funny that it's also Mike Trout. You got to recognize it, and you got to induct Tim Salmon into the Hall of Guy.
I mean, we have to induct Garrett Anderson at some point now, because we have 2/3 of that 2002 Angels outfield. We got to find a way to just make it a clean sweep, just because that would be really funny if we had the entire 2002 Angels outfield in the Hall of Guy.
Well, first I have to get the entire 2012 Orioles in, but after I get the entire 2012 Orioles roster, then we can talk about the 2002 Angels outfield. Also, it's crazy that the two biggest all-star snubs career-wise were both on that 95 Angels team and got screwed by Jim Edmonds. I just want to say one more time, truly, I got nothing against Jim Edmonds for all of the years of his life except for 1995. Fuck 1995 Jim Edmonds.
Let's ban 1995 Jim Edmonds only. The rest of Jim Edmonds,
1 year of his life is omitted.
If anyone wants to bring Jim Edmonds in the future, you have to just skip 1995 when you're talking about him.
I wouldn't even say it if someone started talking about it. I would just... Thankfully, I don't think I'll have to bleep any of this last episode that we are now wrapping up. I, of course, would only be able to bleep it, though, with the help of a couple people, those being producer Craig and all the coders behind him. Wouldn't be able to put the episode together without the lovely theme music from our musical director, Don Ham. And there wouldn't be any point in putting that episode out unless it was going to you, dear listener, who we thank most of all. If you want to keep up with anything else, if you think you got a good bracket, go ahead and share it with us on the Discord, which you can find at bit.ly/remember that guy, all one word, all lowercase. Anything else from you guys on the way out?
I'm just glad I was able to hate on John Scott a little bit more today.
Yeah, you have some feelings about John Scott.
I mean, we had an entire episode based on that, so clearly.
well, hopefully we won't have any more episodes about John Scott. But for every one of those episodes, I will remain one of your hosts, James.
I've been the very special hater, Xavier.
And I'm Diaz, and as Bill Raftery will exclaim many times this month, how about the onions on this guy? I think we're doing D3 lax at the link and these high school like lacrosse things. Dude, it's the funniest thing because it's like it ends up being one of my like highest paying days of the year. But literally like the first game, it's like, oh, and here's the freshman class of high school lacrosse prospects. And like I don't mean rising about to be freshmen in college. I mean like, no, these kids have not yet completed a day of class of high school. And yet here we are broadcasting their game onto ESPN for like an actual audience. It's insane. Like the lacrosse audience is very niche, but very consistent throughout any level of lacrosse that they can watch.
As a former member of the lacrosse, former and hopefully future again, member of the lacrosse watching contingent, it doesn't need to spread any further than it has, but it's got its North Carolina, upstate New York, and Maryland 3 home bases.
Yep. It's like take the widespreadness of hockey and like take that in half, but up the derangement by 5 times. And that's what like lacrosse fan base is.
I own lacrosse sticks, like plural. I own multiple lacrosse sticks. I've never played on a team.
Never know when it's time to have a toss.